Thank you for joining us for today's webinar entitled The Enterprise Value of Simplified Technical English, presented to you jointly by Etteplan and JANA. We know that you're busy, but we're excited that you were able to join us, and we're sure that you'll find it worth the time that you invest. My name is Scott Anderson, and I'm the Marketing Manager at JANA. I'll be running things behind the scenes, and I'll be joined momentarily by our two speakers. A few things before I turn things over to them, though. I'd like to start with a quick introduction of each of our speakers, starting with Barry Braster. Barry is the Technology Director at Etteplan, a company which provides design engineering services, embedded systems, and IoT services and technical documentation solutions to the world's leading companies in the manufacturing industry. Barry is a recognized expert in the area of simplified technical English and has 18 years of experience in the technical documentation industry to draw from. Our second presenter today is Dawn Bridges. Dawn is the Manager of Consulting at JANA, a company which offers a number of services aimed at helping other companies author, convert, manage, and publish technical documentation. Dawn also has spent an impressive amount of time in the technical documentation industry and focuses his skills on content development strategies and software integration. And lastly, before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. Our webinar today will run right around 25 minutes, and we'll open it up to a short question and answer session immediately following. During the presentation, your line will be muted as an attendee, but if you think of a question that you'd like to ask our presenters, please do submit it to me via the portal as shown on this slide. I'll collect the questions as we go, and then we'll try to answer as many of them as possible in the time allotted. This webinar is being recorded, and we will include a link with a follow-up email in the follow-up email that we send out over the next day or two. Okay, before I turn the presentation over, I'd like to get started with two quick poll questions. The results of these polls will help to guide the discussion by providing a little bit of insight as to where the majority of the audience lands in terms of the prevalence of the use of style guides and authoring software. So the first poll is, does your writing team use a style guide? You should see that pop up on your screen right now. It's just a simple yes or no. If you wouldn't mind taking just a second to answer this by clicking on one answer or the other and then submitting it. It looks like so far it's pretty widespread. About 74% of people who are chiming in do use a style guide at their company, or at least within their writing team. Leave this open for just a few more seconds to let anybody in, but it's a landslide. About 73% of the people who are attending use a style guide in their writing team. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and then we'll bring up the second poll. The second poll being, what is the predominant tool that your company uses for content creation? Launch this one. What is the predominant tool that your company uses for content creation? Looks like it's neck and neck, but XML is maybe pulling away a little bit. Looks like about 40% of respondents so far use XML, about 25% Word, and about 20% FrameMaker, 10-11% InDesign, and then 7% other. Go ahead and leave this up for a few more seconds, but it looks like those numbers are holding more or less. About 40% of the attendees here are using XML as their predominant tool. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. Final results, 39% XML, 23% Word, 20% FrameMaker, 11% InDesign, and 7% other. All right, so I've closed out the poll. Hopefully, guys, that information will be helpful to you as you move forward in the discussion. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Barry Braster and Don Bridges. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Scott. This is Don Bridges. Barry will be on in one moment. Maybe just to kind of, and I'm with JANA, wanted to maybe set the table and why did we think this would be of interest to you? What's this about Simplified Technical English? How does that add value to my enterprise? One of the things that I've noticed in conferences and forums and roundtables and discussions that we have with managers is there's a fairly consistent voice of how do I improve the quality of the content that we create. And in quality, we're looking at how clear is it, how concise is it, how consistent is it. And there was in this month's, actually last month, the November issue of Intercom, which is the Society of Technical Communications monthly magazine, a very nice article about this. And it says, here are the aspects of what high quality data looks like. And so, I boil it down, and Barry, one more slide or one more click, and the audience will be able to see the URL. And if you don't want to write this down, we can certainly forward it to you afterwards so that you can read the article for yourself. But at the end of the day, how do we help writers create better content? And just to simplify it, easier to understand, less ambiguous, and cheaper to translate. So along those lines, a lot of people have, and Scott, I'm remembering right, roughly 75% of the audience is using style guides. Was that the number that folks came back with?
Yes, sir. 75%, yes.
Okay. So next slide, Barry, or give me 2 clicks. And so style guides have been around for a long time. Most of you, I guess, are familiar with the Chicago Manual of Style. Believe it or not, it's been around for 112 years, since 1906. And kind of foundational 17th edition there. And then the fine folks at Microsoft in '94 came up with the Microsoft Manual of Style, more focused on technical communications, great, good, but also focused on Microsoft products and how those Microsoft products support those. So certainly a step in the right direction. The federal government even got into the game in 2011, the Federal Plain Language Guidelines. And the whole purpose of the style guides was to make it easier for people that create content to go achieve those goals of saying, easier to understand, less ambiguous, and for those folks that are translating, cheaper to translate. And what we see going around sometimes is what I'll call cheat sheets or tips that writers can put up and post at their workstation. And here is one from Plymouth Rock Insurance. And another one that we've seen is one from the Department of Energy that says, here is how you, here's rules that have to do with grammar, here's rules how you do with style, and just, things that are specific to us. And then along in 1983, there was within, and candidly, this started in aerospace and defense, something called Simplified Technical English as a specification. It's an open standard, meaning, and it's a free standard, meaning if you Google ASD STE 100, you can get a copy of it. It's roughly 380 pages, I think. And what we'll be talking about today is that flavor as a style guide. And so next slide, please. So why Simplified Technical English? Why don't we all use the Chicago Manual Style or the Microsoft Guide or something else? And the answer is those are all fine solutions. And whether you say, here's the spec, go incorporate yourself, whether you create cheat sheets or tip sheets, or whether you use an automated solution, all very viable options. But at the end of the day, Simplified Technical English was designed for a few things. One was to ensure product safety, ensure safe of use, to provide a consistent voice, Now, oh, by the way, most of the people creating technical documentation are doing it for profit as part of their business. So reducing the cost of translation, reducing the cost of localization, very important. There's also the realization that a lot of this content goes and is used by people that English is not their native language. So to make it easier for non-native English speakers to go use. An example would be if you said, follow the instructions. And in some cultures, follow means walk behind. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense. Whereas if you say, obey the instructions, okay, that has the meaning. And you might say, well, that's the same thing, but maybe to a non-English speaker, that's not quite the same thing. And then lastly, what we have seen in the world of augmented reality and artificial intelligence and mobile devices is there is a premium on having very concise instructions, because you're presenting either information visually, if it's on something like Google Glass or a tablet or a mobile device, or very concise in that a chatbot is providing a response, and you want there's a value in a brevity of words. So along those lines, next slide, Barry. I thought maybe it would be a good idea to give you a before and after of, what are we talking about? Really, where does the rubber hit the road? And this example that I'm providing, JANA is on the a committee that is coming up with new standards, and we were asked by this committee, hey, look over it, any inputs you have. So on the left is the draft words that they were going to use in the standard. On the right is after we applied Simplified Technical English. And in the spirit of full disclosure, we used a tool from Etteplan called HyperSTE that we'll be talking about a little bit. And the purpose of this is to, as I said, make things easier to understand, make things clear, make things concise, make things less ambiguous. So what I would like to do is welcome Barry Braster from Etteplan to the webinar, and Barry's going to walk us through what is the process, what are some of the options that you have, and I'll be back towards the end. Barry, it's yours.
Thank you, Don. Hello, everyone. This is Barry Braster with Etteplan. Right where Scott left it off. So mentioned already safe product use, safe on translation and documentation. So how do we then do that? So there's two main principles that you need to do in content quality, in simplified English or any other way of controlled authoring, however you want to call it. So one is the writing rules. Those writing rules, there are about 60 plus or so, are all aimed at keeping things simple, to be specific and be consistent. For instance, if you say, make sure that the temperature in this room is okay, well, what might be okay for me might be very cold for Don, or the other way around. And then also be consistent. So whenever you are starting to use certain terms, then make sure that everyone, all the authors, are using the same terms with one meaning. And that brings me to the next rule, which is to standardize on terms. The specification itself has about 3,000 words in them. The idea there is that one word can only have one meaning. So if you have a technical noun that can also be used as a verb, that's a no-no. Same the other way around. But also if you have multiple words that have the same meaning, or if you have one word that has multiple meanings, that's also not something that you would want to do, because it's going to cause confusion with your end users. And that means that one of the steps for implementing is to also standardize on your own terminology, where one word, again, can only have one meaning. The second then part is then how you then enforce this, right? So there's a couple of implementation steps that I'll discuss with you in a moment. But there's the manual approach, of course, with enforcing this, and then there's the automated approach to enforce this. And of course, we think that automated is better because there are tools and technologies out there. We have one as well that can help you check your content. It can give you ratings rather than having you do things manually, and it can do that not on just sample files, but it can do that on all your files, and give you the ratings that you need, the metrics that you need with regards to translatability or Flash Kincaid grade or readability, etc. But it's only part of the solution. So other metrics here, and Don in the end will talk a little bit about the great white paper that he wrote on metrics. But with STE, you can get metrics like what we've done here is do a survey amongst our customers. We've been doing this for close to 20 years now. Is overall you get a 30% savings on translation and localization. 40% words are being reduced, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, how to apply that, because that's not just using the tool. Quality improvements, 30% to reduce product cycle time, because in the end you'll be able to stick with the need to know and not so much with the write the nice to know. That can help you save cost and time in authoring, and then a few of the others that you can see right there. But to briefly get back to what an implementation entails, because it's actually not just about buying a simplified English checker or a simplified English tool. These are the 5 steps that and again, we've been doing this for close to 20 years, and we have trained close to 3,000 authors. We feel that that needs to happen. One is to train your authors. They have to go through an STE or a controlled authoring writing course. Usually it takes about 2 days or so. There's companies like ourselves that do that out there, but it's important to do that. And why? Because not only will you learn about the writing rules and how to write an STE, but also why to write an STE. Don mentioned already the word follow. Well, you have to understand also why you cannot use the word follow, because in other language cultures it could mean to go after, right? And so you need to understand not just the how, but also the why. And then the second part that's quite important is to you learn how to stick with the need to know, how to write the need to know, and not so much the nice to know. And that can actually help you save, as the metrics just showed you earlier, save 40% in reduced word count. Build your dictionary, I mentioned that already, is to standardize on terms, is that within your organization you're going to have to find a way, and again that's something that we can help you with, to find out how words are being used. If they're being used as verbs, they can no longer be used as nouns, and vice versa. If they have multiple meanings, or if you have multiple words that have the same meaning, that's something that you need to deal with as well. So you're going to end up with a terminology list, a dictionary, with a list of words that are either approved or not approved. And then, of course, checking your content with technology. But equally important is to define milestones. Where were you before? How much translation cost did you have? How much compliant did you need to be with the specification or other style guides, so that it can help you define milestones for cost savings, quality improvement. And then the last part is to have processes and workflows in place, because this is going to be a new way of authoring, and that means that actually is a bit of a cultural place, and you need to involve other folks as well. So to create this type of, to be able to successfully implement something like STE, it's all about awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement according to this model. Have a business case in place. Where were you before? Where do you want to be later? Is it going to save costs? Okay, then how much was your cost in the first place, right? So help set that roadmap, help set the milestones. If you're going to implement this with different business units, then make sure that you have STE champions, as we'd like to call it, within each unit, and then give your authors time to master STE. It usually takes a couple of weeks to get familiar with the new way of writing, but give yourself that time as well, and make sure that your managers know about this as well. How do you going to convert standard text from SMEs? Do you even need to do that, or do you only want to write new content in STE? How do you get approval from these subject matter experts and engineers that are usually also involved in content creation? How to respond to reactions from others, and then of course you also need a quality and a terminology manager, specifically the last one. Not that quality manager is less important, but do not over or undermine how to be able to maintain and update your company dictionary with new terms, because in the beginning that will happen quite a bit. Then a few misconceptions. Don and myself, whenever we speak at conference, we always like to say this, tell this to everyone, but STE is not going to turn a bad writer into a good writer. It's going to turn a good writer into an even better writer, absolutely. But there are certain aspects of English authoring that you need to be aware of that STE is not the only tool to help you get there. Another one is restrictive. Sometimes we hear, well, it's too restrictive. Well, it's actually very suitable for complex text, but what you need to do is understand it, embrace it, and then you will actually find that it's actually not that restrictive in the first place. Again, it's a new way of writing. It's a bit of a cultural change. Is it difficult to utilize? Sure, in the beginning, but you need to get a feel for it. Incorrect STE, there's something like that as well. That's not something that we call don't play the checker tool game, where you're just going to click on every word and make sure that they're at some point in time no longer colored or give you feedback. That's not how to do it. You need to be, as an author, it's the knowledge of the author together with the tool that will give you the best results. In the end, the author, of course, knows about the thought that you're trying to write down. Set expectations, and then of course it's not only for non-native English speakers. We just need to be aware of what certain things mean. Again, it's about meeting each other in the middle. You, as an author that may have a different technical language or cultural background, you're writing for an end user that also may have a different language, technical, or cultural background. We need to understand each other. So that being said, I'll go into a brief demo. I mentioned, I think I understood that most of you are using XML, so I'm just going to grab the Oxygen editor here. HyperSTE is a plugin to that. Again, the idea is that to have your dictionary in place. So, and what I would like to do is just, as an example, is just take the core dictionary and do a check for you. And once I do that, you see that there's quite a bit of red in here, right? That means that HyperSTE is telling us there's a lot of unknown words in here. So that's something that we need to be aware of when there's no dictionary available. So the next thing I'm going to do is switch back to a demo file that I had in place where actually these words were in there, and do another check. As you can see, these words are now being actually recognized. And in this case, we're in the dictionary of a company called Tellabs, which tells us that we cannot use indicator light, but it needs to be a non-shade alike. And I can just do replace all, and it will make those changes for me. It does so according to all the writing rules and then some. We mentioned already the STE, but if you look at the Chicago Manual of Style and most other style guides or content guides, 80% I would argue is about the same and how to write clear and concise. Use articles in front of nouns, otherwise they can be considered as verbs, which can cause confusion. Don't use words like should, because in Asian cultures it could mean I have a choice. So it needs to be you can, you will, or you must, and you would use HyperSTE to do either word for word replacements or to tell you things like, in this case, warning. A warning needs to start with a simple and clear command, and then make sure that it actually does so. Okay, so you can create reports. So I can just create a report on this file. I can also do it on multiple files. I'll talk more about that in a moment. That particular thing that you saw there. Then there's a timestamp that's created as well automatically, so that you can actually over time see how documents are doing. And when I open this up in your internet browser, it will tell me that there's a 70% compliance rating. Actually, I just made some changes, and I know that the before example was about 59% compliance rating. So just by making a few changes, we already jumped up the compliance by about 11%. We get readability, flash kinkage rate, translatability, etc. And if we want to get more detailed results, we browse to, for instance, the non-approved words. We put them in a high to low frequency order, and we see how many words were used in what wrong context and how to fix those. So just to give you a really good baseline measurements, you, for instance, would be able to run all your documents, thousands of pages for that matter, and see where you are as far as compliant, and as to already start with a baseline measurement as far as setting those milestones. Another thing I want to briefly show you is, for instance, these sentences over here. So if you look at them, they are all basically, they're different words, but all of these writers are trying to say the same thing. One is saying put the engines that are not necessarily off position. Another one says all engines should be turned off. These, of course, are different pages and different parts of the manual. Now, if I check this page again with HyperSTE, we get some colored feedback. And if I click on them, I can also ask down here, there's a sentence database that we can see, and then this plus symbol means that someone rewrote that already. That is a sentence that has a high compliance rating with similar sentences that are being used. So I can just select that and do a replace. And as you can see, by over time, by doing that, you can see how people can reuse each other's compliant sentences. So just a little bit of an example on how that would particularly work, but we support multiple authoring tools, but there you go. So going then back to the slides, and then Don, go ahead and take it away for the last.
That's great. Thank you, Barry. So a couple of things that may be of interest to you. I know that a few slides back, Barry had presented some metrics. And I have to tell you, I love metrics, and was meeting with a manager that has Simplified Technical English implemented. And I showed him the slide that Barry had presented about metrics, and he looked at it and said, yep, that's about right. That's about what his experience was. So please, if you look at those metrics and say, that can't be, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to put you in touch with the manager that said, yeah, those metrics look about right. I have written a white paper about metrics. If you would like a copy of it, it is at janacorp.com/whitepapers. Barry and the folks at Etteplan have written everything that you wanted to know about Simplified Technical English. The URL for that is simplifiedenglish.com, or you can send Barry an email. His email is listed there, and Barry will be, I'm sure, happy to forward you a link to get you hooked up with that book. So, Scott, what I'm going to do, if it's okay, is if we've had any questions come in, I know that you asked for that at the beginning, maybe open it up to the questions that the audience has.
I did open it up to the audience, and we did receive a few questions. Hopefully we'll be able to get in as many as we can in the last couple of minutes that we've got here. Question number one, is it better to implement Simplified Technical English before or after my team moves to XML?
Barry,
Would
you
that
want to take
be me, or? Sure. Yeah. It doesn't really matter, really, because the nice thing with STE, it just looks at content. So whether you work in Word or whether you work in an XML editor, STE doesn't really care about structure. It looks at content. That being said, it does care about structure a little bit, because with Hyper-STE you're able to use structure to do conditional checking, but I'll be happy to demo that to you in a different session. But for STE it doesn't really matter, because it looks at the content itself. So it can be either or.
Yeah, and Barry, I guess I would, having worked in conversion for a large part of my career, I would say, if you can go reduce your word count and reduce your page count, most conversions are based on words or pages, and if you can go reduce that, it will have the effect of driving down your conversion costs. So from that perspective, I guess my vote would be probably better to implement STE before, if you're going to go migrate, and most people migrate towards XML. Reducing that word count, reducing that page count will much more likely reduce your conversion costs.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Another question that we've got is, how well does Hyper-STE perform when compared to Acrolinks?
Well, it kind of depends what you want to get out of it. I would say the two tools have slightly different approaches. It's my personal opinion that Acrolinks looks more at information in the general, where Hyper-STE is more focused on STE and technical documentation. So it kind of depends on what you want to get out of it, I would say. I would say both tools are quite similar. There are some differences left and right, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to mention those all to you right now here. So I would say do a head-to-head comparison and find out, based on your particular requirements, which tool would help you best meet your needs.
Okay.
And Barry, that is exactly the advice that we give, is that go look at your options and go make the best decision for your business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's very good. Another quick question that we have here. We're just about needing to wrap it up. Hopefully we can get to one or two more. Do you have an example of any CCMSs that are already integrated with STE?
When you mean integration, as in having it integrated in their own authoring environment, because there are CCMSs that still use an authoring or an editing tool, like for instance Oxygen plugs into several CCMSs. So does FrameMaker, so does Arbitext. So Hyper-C supports those tools as a plugin to FrameMaker, Arbitext, Oxygen, etc. Then there's, of course, the other thing is that the CCMSs that have their own authoring environment, and we have done some integrations. Ultra Author would be one of them. I think that's one of Don's favorite tools in the S1000D field. So we've done an integration with them, and there's a few others as well.
Okay,
so
Don,
Barry, would it be fair to say that if someone has specifics, they can point those questions to you as far as specific product integrations? Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, great.
Okay. And we're 1 minute over, but I want to get this one last question in. Is Simplified Technical English used much outside of aerospace and defense?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because Don mentioned already that in 1983 the spec was created first. It wasn't even a spec back then. And I would say that about what they did at the specification, those folks that maintained the standard, is they looked at other standards around. They didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So if you look at the history of standards for a controlled language, there's been tons of them, and they would probably have reused 80 to 90% of them, which actually didn't come from aerospace at all. It was machinery industry as a main industry using this to save translation costs. Back then, it was about 80 to 20% when they started to work with the STE spec. Now, these days, and there was a presentation given this over the summer by the STE&G group, it's actually the other way around. Or almost the other way around. It's 70% or 60 to 70% of organizations using STE these days is non-aerospace and defense. Which tells you something. So a lot of companies these days are using the STE standard as a basis for their own controlled language requirements, and then apply flexibility where they need.